Kennedy used to dress, the little pillbox hat and the tailored suit. And I don't know if she occupied the room at one time or was a hostess of some sort, but she was just standing there leaning over my bed looking at me. Didn't say anything, but it was clear as day, literally quite detailed apparition. Stayed there for 20, 30 seconds, and as she stood up again, smiled and disappeared. We've heard all kinds of sounds on that ship, from noises next door, and then in the morning we find out there's no compartment next door to us. Numerous experiences.
Jeff, have you ever had any intelligent communication with a spirit?
Yeah, I have. In fact, that's an important definition of having a ghostly experience. There's so many things that are paranormal that are not ghostly. In order to say you've had a ghostly encounter, there has to be an intelligent interaction between the ghost and a witness or the environment. And the intelligent interaction with the environment might be the movement of something, or a message found scribbled on a pad of paper, or something of this sort. An intelligent interaction with a witness might be direct eye contact, gestures made by the ghost, or receiving some sort of auditory message. They might speak to you. And yes, I've received many of these things.
What kind of intelligent communication have you yourself received from a ghost?
Well, I've had answers to my questions. I've often, when we do investigations, we'll have recorders running and we'll ask questions like, did you die here? Were you murdered? How old are you? What are your names? What's your name? And we will get intelligent answers to those questions.
But are these intelligent answers via EVP, or are they audible right at that time?
Well, in many cases, they only show up on the recorder, but in my experience with my sensitivities, I've heard them as well. And in some cases, I've heard things that didn't show up on the recorders. And we did a TV show on the Queen Mary a couple of years ago, and I heard tremendous noises in the engine room, the first-class swimming pool, and in an old space on the ship that used to be a kitchen. It really was abandoned at this point, in pretty bad shape when we were in there filming. And the audio recorders for the production company didn't pick up anything. Neither did my handheld recorder, but I heard tremendous sounds and people speaking, and the sounds of a fight that took place in this abandoned kitchen, sounds of the watertight door slamming shut down in the engine room that killed a man in 1966. So a lot of times it's the sensitivity of the investigator that picks them up and not so much a recorder.
You said earlier that you're very attuned to the spirits. And have you always had this ability, or did something happen in your life that triggered your ability to communicate with spirits?
No, I didn't have any sort of epiphany or traumatic event that transformed me. When I was about 10 years old, living in an island community in Alameda, I noticed a man walking down the street past our home, looked like a sailor in an old-time outfit with a sea bag slung over his shoulder. And he turned to look at me and stared at me intently. And as I watched him, he simply faded away before my eyes. So I assumed he was a ghost from the old days when Alameda was a harbor for sailing vessels. And at that point on, from the age of about 10, I found that I had a sensitivity. My friends and I used to sneak into some of these abandoned Victorian mansions, and very often I would hear things and see things that my friends did not hear or see. And from that point on, I realized I had a sensitivity to these things.
How do the spirits know that you have this sensitivity, Jeff?
Well, I'm not sure that they really have recognized it in me, but there have been many instances when I've got the impression that the spirit was thankful to have someone to communicate with. I mean, I go into a place and I'll see things and hear things that others don't, but I'm not certain the spirits have suddenly recognized that they have someone in their midst they can communicate with. But I express my interest in them, and I often do that even if I'm not on a formal paranormal investigation. If I get a vibe in a place, whether it's a new structure or an old one, I'll simply say, I'm here, and I'd be willing to communicate with you, and you can talk to me. I understand you, and sort of urge them on. And often I'll get whispered messages in my ear or sounds. Sometimes they'll say, please get out, or they'll be more forceful and they'll yell at me to get out because they don't want me in their space. But very often, I think they're happy to have someone to communicate with.
Tell me, Jeff, are there ghosts that hang around graveyards? Because, you see all these ghost tours. They love dragging their customers into graveyards. And if I was a ghost, and when I become a ghost, the last place I will want to hang around is a graveyard.
Well, I think you have the right perspective on this. In fact, a lot of people who go out ghost hunting think that the graveyard in the middle of the night is the place to go. And serious paranormal investigators have the opposite opinion. Graveyards are not the place to go, with possibly one exception, and that is that if the grave has been desecrated, damaged by some sort of environmental process, or if the body was put in the wrong grave, it's mismarked, there's a good chance there may be a spirit there trying to correct whatever has gone wrong with that grave. Now, there's a lot of paranormal activity in graveyards, however, these are environmental imprints created by living people, and these are imprints of emotions, and typically they are repetitive, intense emotions, and we often find them at the graves of children because, as you can imagine, if a child dies, a family will visit that grave several times over a period of decades, perhaps more than that, and pour out their emotions, and this leaves an imprint that sensitives can pick up. And also you can pick it up on audio recorders and sometimes as images in digital pictures. Mm-hmm. So you may not run into the ghost, the spirit of a dead person so often, but you can find these environmental imprints very readily in graveyards.
So is there a place where people or paranormal investigators would look for spirits? Would a spirit or a ghost be more likely to be at the place of their passing? For example, if someone was in a tragic, fatal car accident, would their ghost be more likely to wander the area near the fatal accident compared to, let's say, their home or the funeral home where they were exposed and laid out for 3 days?
It's far more likely that in the case of an accident, the ghost will go to its home or any other place it felt most comfortable. It's very rare for a ghost to remain at an accident site. The instances where that happens, it's usually a case where the ghost is totally confused by the transition from life to death and is fearful of moving. The ghost will not remain inside a damaged vehicle as it's hauled away to the junkyard, that sort of thing. But the ghost will go on to visit family members most often, and this is usually their home. Mm-hmm. In fact, many people I've met around the hospital tell me that their loved one may have passed away in the intensive care unit, but a couple days later, when the family's gathered at the home and talking about the deceased, everybody's hearing voices, hearing doors close, hearing footsteps that can't be explained, and getting a sense that that person, the deceased, is present in the house at that time. So the person has made the movement from the hospital bed to home, even if that home is some distance away.
Is ghost hunting becoming a science, Jeff?
A lot of people are trying to make it into a science, and I don't think they're succeeding very well. If you watch the paranormal shows on television, very often they pull out a lot of gadgets, and some of them very expensive. Infrared video, and they connect them up to computers and process the images, and sometimes have 2 or 3 vehicles loaded with very expensive gear, and it's done in the misguided notion that they're somehow making the investigations more scientific. I often write about this on my website, that being equipment heavy in one's investigations does not make the investigation scientific. And many people who pursue this line of investigation don't truly understand the scientific method. Now, in their defense, I'd have to say that I'm not certain you could apply the scientific method to paranormal investigation in many instances, because it's very difficult to have control groups and that sort of thing. Ghosts just don't show up whenever you want them to, and you can't transport them to a laboratory for investigation. So it may be very difficult or impossible to apply scientific methods to ghost hunting, but having a lot of equipment simply doesn't make it scientific. Now, there are people at Duke University and some other places that are investigating paranormal phenomena, such as remote viewing and precognition and things of this sort, and they're making some headway. But in terms of proving or disproving the existence of ghosts, people really aren't making any headway at all with all the equipment they have.
Are the number of paranormal shows on TV, are they an asset or a hindrance when it comes to true paranormal research?
That's a little difficult to answer because we have a mixed bag on television. Some of them, I think, are a hindrance. They are overly emotional, and as I mentioned earlier, we've seen some of these people who are seeking paranormal activity
running
but
away from it,
finding it, turn around and scream and run and cry, and I think a lot of that is done for dramatic effect, and perhaps is not an honest response to what they've encountered. But some shows are pretty good. Now, if you're somebody who's interested in the technical approach to ghost hunting, things like Ghost Hunters International, and Ghost Adventures are pretty good with that. There's always some dramatic element interjected, and I think that's because it's tough to create a show week after week that shows something that is clearly paranormal.
Especially in the world of realities, when you go out on an investigation, something doesn't always happen.
That's exactly right. And there's a lot of groups I know of who go out every weekend and get next to nothing. Yeah. And often they come back with nothing in spite of 12 hours spent in a haunted house or someplace like that. So it's really tough to get something to present on TV. So there's some drama interjected there. But if the methodologies displayed can be quite interesting and can help people understand how to go about a ghost investigation.
When I see the people with the infrared and all these other high-tech gadgets that they use, talk about special effects. Come on, if a ghost is really has no essence, it will not show up on infrared. It will not show up on night vision. Like this is in my humble opinion, just a bunch of bunk.
Well, exactly, and I've said as much. I've said on my website that people who use some of these high-tech devices, including very expensive gadgets, don't understand the limitations of the devices they're using. They like to use electromagnetic field detectors, but as we said earlier, if ghosts are not composed of atoms, they're not creating an electromagnetic field, so you can't detect them with that. And many people don't understand calibration, and they don't understand test, retest reliability and validity and other scientific concepts.
But it looks good on TV to see them with schlepping all this equipment. So there we go. Jeff, stand by.
It looks good on TV.
Yeah, Jeff, stand by. You and I have to take our final break. Jeff Dwyer is our special guest, www.jeffdwyer.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone. Don't go away. With each new extreme weather event or terrorist act, it becomes increasingly obvious that we live in uncertain and challenging times. We all buy car insurance. Why not collapse and catastrophe insurance? Matthew Stein, an MIT-trained engineer and green builder, has written 2 outstanding books to help people prepare, plan for, and deal with everything from minor situations lasting a few days to full-on collapse. Matt's first book, When Technology Fails, is a manual for self-reliance, sustainable living, and surviving the long emergency. This massive book covers the gamut from first aid and emergency preparedness to alternative healing, renewable energy, primitive living skills, and 18th century technologies that could be critical to your comfort and survival in a long-lasting crisis. Matt's second book, When Disaster Strikes, is a comprehensive emergency preparedness handbook and survival guide. When Disaster Strikes is an essential item for every family's go bag. Both books are available at all usual sources. There's a wealth of totally free information posted at whentechfails.com, and author-signed copies may be purchased at mattstein.com. That's www.whentechfails.com and www.mattstein.com.